Today, Iran says it has arrested several people for their role in the downing of a Ukrainian passenger jet that killed all 176 people on board, including children. The deadly crash has sparked massive anti-government protests in Tehran. Iran's president says he is calling on, quote, dozens of experts to investigate the disaster and that the government will punish everyone it deems responsible for it.
We also have new reporting this morning on the threat posed by Iranian General Qasem Soleimani. State Department security officials tell our Kylie Atwood they were not notified of any imminent threat to 4 specific U.S. embassies leading to his killing. This is after the president said on Fox News he believed Soleimani was going to attack 4 U.S. embassies. Republican Congressman Austin Scott of Georgia is back with us. He sits on the Armed Services Committee. So thank you for being here, for coming back. We had to cut the interview short last week after the Secretary of State was speaking. So thank you for being with me.
Thank you.
The president also said in a tweet overnight that the threat was imminent, but then said, quote, it didn't really matter. It doesn't really matter because of Soleimani's horrible past. Do you agree? Does it not really matter if the threat is imminent to justify taking him out?
Well, I think it was a good strike. He was a terrorist. He was one of the most wanted men across the globe. It was a strike that occurred in Iraq where the president clearly had the legal authority to do it. And so I absolutely support the strike. And I don't know anybody who is questioning the president's decision to take him out up here. Now, I understand that some people different interpretations of the word imminent with regard to the threats, but I would remind you that we had brought in additional Marines and security personnel to the Baghdad embassy. There were riots that are already going on outside of the Baghdad embassy, so we were already at a heightened state of awareness.
Well, the president said that Soleimani was plotting, he believed, to attack 4 U.S. embassies. Defense Secretary Mark Esper, when asked about that on CBS over the weekend, said, quote, I didn't see one with regard to 4 embassies. You were briefed. You're on the Armed Services Committee. Were you briefed on a specific threat to 4 embassies?
I saw all of the reporting. I saw all of the reporting that's out there from Secretary Esper and what President Trump had to say. Well, I will tell you, it was a good strike. The president made the right call.
But were you briefed on 4 specific embassies?
I believe there was an imminent threat to our embassies. I believe that is the reason there were additional Marines that were brought in. If you look at the protests that were going on outside of the Baghdad embassies, there is a reason that additional security personnel were brought in to protect our bases.
So, but that's a no on you didn't get a briefing of these 4 specific embassies. Is that correct? Just so we can move on.
I'm not gonna answer that question directly. I will tell you I have seen various types of reports, but the thing I will tell you is that we don't bring additional Marines and security personnel into an embassy unless we believe that we have a threat there.
All right, let's move on to the broader threat, right, and when an attack is warranted and needed and when it's not. Because just over the weekend, on Saturday in Afghanistan, the Taliban claimed credit for an attack that killed 2 U.S. service members. Let me show you who they are. Staff Sergeant Ian Paul McLaughlin and also Private First Class Miguel Angel Villalon. The Secretary of State said in response to that the Taliban is still, quote, an enormous risk. But you know, as of November, the U.S. has restarted negotiations with the Taliban. Why take out Qasem Soleimani and yet negotiate for the Taliban, who just killed 2 U.S. service members over the weekend?
Those are 2 totally separate issues. I will tell you that if the Taliban wants to have serious negotiations, then they need to abide by the ceasefire, and then we can have serious negotiations. But I trust the President and the Secretary of State and our military generals' leadership to negotiate in the best interest of our country and especially of our soldiers.
Well, as of now, the U.S. is still, the President has not ceased those negotiations with the Taliban since these 2 American soldiers were killed. Should he, as a result, then?
I trust him to make that decision. I would tell you that I would lean towards the side of not stopping the negotiations.
Let me move on.
I would lean towards that side, but I trust President Trump to make the decision in the best interest of the country.
Let me ask you about impeachment before we move on. Sure. There was a discussion now, a debate in your party on the Senate side about whether or not Republican senators should vote to immediately dismiss the impeachment trial of the president, right? To essentially not hold a Senate trial. Is that justified? Is that a prudent move, or do you think the American people should watch this play out?
I don't think they'll immediately dismiss it. It's up to the U.S. Senate at this stage. My understanding is Pelosi is going to send the articles over this week. It was a purely partisan process on the House side. We'll see what happens on the Senate side. The comments that I've heard from senators are that if there are witnesses that are called, then certainly if the Democrats get to call their witnesses, then the Republicans the president will get to call his witnesses as well. And so those decisions will be made on the Senate side. And what I do think you'll see on the Senate side is a much more fair process, a more equitable process than you saw on the House side.
Let's see how it plays out, those articles going over to the Senate tomorrow. Finally, on a very important issue that we think doesn't get enough attention, and that is national debt and deficits. You've been outspoken on it. We just learned yesterday that the federal deficit topped $1 trillion last year. This after the president promised in that Washington Post piece a few years ago that he could eliminate the national debt in 8 years. You said on your website, Washington continues to spend at unsustainable levels. This was back in 2013. And you called out President Obama's, quote, unwillingness to address this. Are you willing to call out President Trump on the exact same thing?
I'm willing to call out the legislative branch and the executive branch on this. The bottom line is the Social Security and the Medicare formulas, whether it's on the revenue side or the spending side, simply don't work. We're not taking in enough revenue on the tax side to pay for the expenditures on the expenditure side with regard to Social Security and Medicare. So we have to find a path forward that fully funds Social Security and Medicare. And if I'm not mistaken, that deficit this year exceeds 100% of the spending on national security related issues and almost reaches the total discretionary spending numbers of the country. So we've got to find a path forward. This is a danger to all of us, regardless of what party you're a part of. And certainly as a dad, I've got a 20-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 2-year-old. I'm extremely concerned about the impact that it has on them.
Well, look, every vote for spending or tax cuts, you have to ask who's going to have the stomach to actually make the hard choices. And both parties on this. Congressman Austin Scott, thanks for coming. We'll have you back soon.
Thank you, ma'am.
Appreciate it.